Chapter 7 The Stapletons of Merripit House. The fresh beauty of the following morning did something to efface our minds of the grim and grey impression which had been both left upon us by our first experience at Baskerville Hall. As Sir Henry and I sat down to breakfast, the sunlight flooded in through the high mullioned windows, throwing watery patches of color from the coats of arms which covered them. The dark paneling glowed like bronze in the golden rays, and it was hard to realize that this was indeed the chamber which had struck such a gloom before our souls the evening before. "I guess it is ourselves and not the house we have to blame," said the baronet. "We were tired with our journey, chilled by our drive, so we took the grey view of the place. And now we are fresh and well, and so always cheerful again. And yet it was not entirely a question of imagination," I answered. "Did you, for example, happen to hear someone, a woman, I think, sobbing in the night?" "I heard it distinctly, and I am sure that it was really the sob of a woman." "We must ask about it right away." He rang the bell and asked Barrymore whether he could account for the experience. It seemed to me that the pallid features of the butler turned a shade paler as he listened to his master's question. "There are only 2 women in the house, Sir Henry," he answered. "One is a scullery maid, who sleeps in the other wing, and the other is my wife, who I can answer for it that the sound could not have come from her." Yet he lied as he said it, for it chanced that at breakfast I met Mrs. Barrymore in the long corridor, with the sun full upon her face. She was a large, impassive, heavy-featured woman, with a stern, set expression of mouth. But her telltale eyes were red, and glanced at me from between swollen lids. It was she, then, who wept in the night, and if she did so, her husband must know it. Yet he had taken the obvious risk of discovery in declaring that it was not so. Why had he done this? Why did she weep so bitterly? Already around this pale-faced, handsome, black-bearded man there was gathering an atmosphere of mystery and of gloom. It was he who had been the first to discover the body of Sir Charles, and we had only his word for all the circumstances which led up to the old man's death. Was it possible that it was Barrymore, after all, whom had seen the cab in Regent Street? The beard might as well have been the same, the cabman described a somewhat shorter man. But such an impression might easily have been erroneous. How could I settle the point forever? Obviously, the first thing to do was to see if the Grimpen postmaster, and find whether the test telegram had been placed in Barryman's own hands. Be the answer that what it might, it should at least have something to report to Sherlock Holmes. Sir Henry had numerous papers to examine after breakfast, so that it was time to practice for my execution. It was a pleasant walk of 4 miles along the ledge of the moor, leading me to at least a small grey hamlet, in which 2 larger buildings, which proved to be the inn and the house of Dr. Mortimer, stood high above the rest. The postmaster, who was also the village grocer, had a clear recollection of the telegram. "Certainly, sir," he said. "I had the telegram delivered to Mr. Barrymore exactly as directed." "Who delivered it?" "My boy here, James. You delivered that telegram to Mr. Barrymore at the Hall last week, did you not?"
"Yes, father, I delivered it."
"Into his own hands?" I asked.
"Well, he was up to the loft at the time, so
that I could not put it in his own good hands, but I gave it to Mrs. Barrymore's hands, and she promptly promised to deliver it at once. Did you see Mr. Barrymore? No, sir. I tell you, he was in the loft. If you didn't see him, how do you know he was left in the loft? Well, surely his own wife ought to know where he is, said the postman, testily. Didn't he get the telegram? If there's any mistake, as it is Mr. Barrymore himself to complain. It seemed hopeless to pursue the inquiry any further, but it was clear that, in spite of Holmes's ruse, we had no proof that Barrymore had not been in London all the time. Suppose that it were so. Suppose that the same man had been in the last who had seen Sir Charles alive, and the first to dog the new heir when he returned to England. Then, was he the agent of others, or had he some sinister design of his own? What interest could he have in persecuting the Baskervilles family? I thought a strange warning clipped out of the leading article of the Times. Was that his work, or was it purposely doing the someone who was bent upon counteracting the schemes? The only conceivable notion was that, which had been suggested by Sir Henry, by that the family could be scared away, a comfortable permanent home would be secured for the Barrymores. But surely such an explanation that would be quite inadequate to account for the deep and subtle screaming which seemed to be weaving an invisible net around the young baronet. Holmes himself had said that no more complex case had come to him in all the long series of his sensational investigations. I prayed that as I walked back along the grey, lonely road, that my friend might soon be freed from his preoccupations and be able to come down to take his heavy burden of responsibility from my shoulders. Suddenly my thoughts were interrupted by the sound of running feet behind me, and by a voice which called me by name. I turned, expecting to see Dr. Mortimer, but to my surprise it was a stranger who was pursuing me. He was a small, slim, clean-shaven, prim-faced man, flaxen-haired and lean-jawed, between 30 and 40 years of age, dressed in a grey suit and wearing a straw hat. A tin box for botanical specimens hung over his shoulder as he carried a green butterfly net in one of his hands. "You will, I am sure, excuse my presumption, Dr. Watson," he said, as he came up panting upon where I stood. "Here on the moor, we're homely folk and do not wait for formal introductions. You may possibly have heard my name from one of my mutual friends. I am Stapleton of Merripit House." "Your netted box would have told me as much," I said, for I knew that Mr. Stapleton was a naturalist. "But how did you know my name?" "I've been calling on Mortimer, and he pointed you out to me from the window, as his surgery as you passed. As the road lay the same way, I thought I would overtake you and introduce myself. I trust that Sir Henry is none the worse for his journey." "He is very well, thank you." "We were all rather afraid that after the sad death of Sir Charles, that the new baronet might refuse to live here. It is asking much of a wealthy man to come down and bury himself in a place of that kind, but I need not tell you that it means a very great deal to the countryside. Sir Henry has, I suppose, no superstitious fears in those matters." "I do not think that it is likely. Of course, you know that the legend of the fiend dog which haunts the family." "I have heard it." It is an extraordinary how credulous the peasants are about it here. Any number of them are ready to swear that they have seen such a creature upon the moor. He spoke with a smile, but I seemed to read in his eyes that he took the matter very seriously. The story took a great hold upon the imagination of Sir Charles, and I have no doubt that it led to his tragic end. But how? His nerves were worked up that the appearance of any dog might have had a fatal effect upon his diseased heart. I fancy that he really did see something of the kind upon the last night in the alley. I feared that some disaster might occur, for I was very fond of the old man, and I knew that his heart was weak. Thank you for that, right? How did you know that? My friend Mortimer told me. You think, then, that some dog pursued Sir Charles, and that he died of fright of consequence? Have you any better explanation? I have not come to any conclusion. As Mr. Sherlock Holmes. The words took away my breath for an instant, but a glance at the placid face and steadfast eyes of my companion showed me that no surprise was intended. It is useless for us to pretend that we do not know of you, Dr. Watson, he said. The records of your detective have reached us here, and you could not celebrate him without being known yourself. When Mortimer told me your name, he could not deny your identity. If you are here, then it follows that Mr. Sherlock Holmes is interesting himself in the matter, and I am naturally curious to know what view he may take. I'm afraid I cannot answer that question. May I ask if he is going to honor us with a visit himself? He cannot leave town at present. He has other cases which engage his attention. What a pity. It might throw some light into which is so dark to us. But as to your own researches, if there is any possible way in which I can be of service to you, I trust that you will command me. If I had any indication of the nature of your suspicions, or how you propose to investigate the case, I might perhaps even now give you some aid or advice. I assure you that I am simply here upon the visit to my friend Sir Henry, and that I need no help of any kind. Excellent, said Stapleton. You are perfectly right to be wary and discreet. I am justly reproved for what I feel is an unjustifiable intrusion, and I promise you that I will not mention the matter again. We had come to a point where a narrow grassy path struck off from the road and wound her way across the moor. A steep, boulder-sprinkled hill lay upon the right, which had in bygone days been cut into a granite quarry. The face which was turned towards us formed a dark cliff, with ferns and brambles growing in its regions. From over a distant rise there floated a grey plume of smoke. A moderate walk along that moor path brings us to the Merripit house, he said. Perhaps you will spare an hour that I may have the pleasure of introducing you to my sister. My first thought was that I should be at Henry's side, but then I remembered the pile of papers and the bills which his study table was littered. I was certain that I could not help him with those, and Holmes had expressly said that I should study the neighbors upon the moor. I accepted Stapleton's invitation, and we turned together down the path. It is a wonderful place, the moor, said he, looking around the undulating downs, long green rollers, and with crests of jagged granite foaming up in the fantastic surges. You never tire of the moor. You cannot think the wonderful secrets which it contains. It is so vast and so barren, and so mysterious. You know it well, then.
I've only been here 2 years. The residents would call me a newcomer. We came shortly after Sir Charles settled, but my tests led me to explore every part of the country round, and I should think that there are a few men who know it better than I do.
Is it so hard to know?
Very hard. You see, for example, this great plain to the north here, with the queer hills breaking out of it. Do you observe anything remarkable about this?
It would be a rare place for a gallop.
You would naturally think so, and the thoughts that it's cost folk their lives before. Uh, you notice that the bright green spots scattered thickly over it?
Yes, they seem more fertile than the rest.
Stapleton laughed. That is the great Grimpen Mire, said he. A false step yonder means death to man or beast. Only yesterday I saw one of the moor ponies wander into it. He never came out. I saw his head for quite a long time craning out of the bog hole, but it sucked him down to the last. Even in dry seasons it is a danger to cross it, but after those autumn rains it is an awful place. And yet I can find my way in the very heart of it and return alive. By George, here's another of these mistakable ponies.
Something brown was rolling and tossing among the green sedges. Then a long, agonized, writhing neck shot upwards, and a dreadful cry echoed over the moor. It turned me cold with horror, but my companion's nerves seemed to be stronger than mine.
It's gone, he said. The mire has him. 2 and 2 days, and many more perhaps, for they get in the way of going there in the dry weather, and never know the difference until the mire has him in its clutch. It's a bad place, the great Grimpen Mire.
And you say you can penetrate it?
Yes, there are 1 or 2 paths which a very active man can take. I found them.
But why should you wish to go into such a horrible place?
Well, you see the hills beyond. They are really islands cut off from all sides by the impassable mire, which has crawled around them in the course of the years. That is where rare plants and butterflies are, if you have the wit to reach them.
I shall try my luck some day.
He looked at me with a surprised face. For God's sake, put such an idea out of your mind, he said. Your blood would be upon my head. I assure you that there would be not a chance of yours coming back alive. It is only by remembering certain complex landmarks that I am able to make it.
Hello, I cried.
What is that?
A long, low moan, indescribably sad, swept over the moor. It filled the air, and yet it was impossible to say whence it came. From a dull murmur it swelled into a deep roar, and then it sank into a melancholy, throbbing murmur once more. Stapleton looked at me with a curious expression in his face.
Queer place, the moor,
he said. But what is it?
The peasants say it is a hound of the Baskervilles calling for its prey.
I've heard it once or twice before, but never so loud. I looked round with a chill of fear in my heart. The huge swelling plain, mottled with green patches of rushes. Nothing stirred of the vast expanse, save for a pair of ravens, which croaked loudly for tore between us. You're an educated man. You don't believe such nonsense as that, said I. What do you think is the cause of so strange a sound?
Bogs make queer noises sometimes. It's the mud settling or the water rising or something.
No, no. That was a living voice.
Well, perhaps it was. Did you ever hear a bittern booming?
No, I never did.
It's a very rare bird, practically extinct in England now, but all things are possible upon the moor. Yes, I should not be surprised to learn that we have heard its cry in the last of the bitterns.
It's the weirdest, strangest thing that I've ever heard in my life.
Yes, it's rather an uncanny place altogether. Look at the hillside yonder. What do you make of those?
The whole steep slope was covered in grey circular rings of stone. A score of them at least. What are they? Sheep pens?
No, they're the homes of our worthy ancestors. Prehistoric men lived thickly on that moor, and as no one in particular has lived there since, we find all this arrangements exactly as they left them. These are his wigwams with his roofs off. You can even see the hearth and his couch if you have the courtesy to go inside.
But it is quite a town. When was it inhabited?
Neolithic man. No date.
What did he do?
He grazed his cattle on these slopes, and he learned to dig for tin when the bronze sword became to supersede the stone axe. Look at the great stone trench on the opposite hill. That is his mark. Yes, you will find some very singular points about them all, Dr. Watson.
Oh, excuse me an instant.
This is a surly cyclopedes.
A small flyer moth had fluttered upon our path. In an instant, Stapleton was rushing with his extraordinary energy and speed to pursue it. To my dismay, the creature flew straight for the great mire, but my acquaintance never paused for an instant, bounding from tuft to tuft behind it, his great nets waving in the air. His grey clothes and jerky zigzag irregularity process made him look unlike a huge moth himself. I was standing watching his pursuit with a mixture of admiration for his extraordinary activity and fear lest he should lose his footing in the treacherous mire, when I heard the sound of steps, and turning round found a woman near me upon the path. She had come from the direction in which the plume of smoke indicated the position of Merripit House, but the dip of the moor had hid her until she was quite close. I could not doubt that this was Mrs. Stapleton, for whom I was been told, since ladies of any sort must be few upon the moor, and I remembered that I heard someone describe her as being a beauty. A woman who approached me was certainly that, and of a most uncommon type. There could not have been a greater contrast between brother and sister, for Stapleton was neutral-tinted, with light hair and grey eyes, while she was darker, and an elegant brunette whom I had seen in England. Slim, elegant, and tall. She had a proud, highly cut face, so regular that it might have seemed impassive were it not for the sensitive mouth and beautiful, dark, eager eyes. With her perfect figure and elegant dress, she was indeed a strange apparition which on a lonely moor path. Her eyes were on her brother as I turned, and when she quickened her pace towards me, I raised my hat as she was about to make some extraordinary remark, when her own words turned all my thoughts into a new channel. "Go back," she said. "Go straight back to London, instantly." I could only stare at her with stupid surprise. Her eyes blazed at me, and she tapped the ground impatiently with her foot. "Why should I go back?" I asked. "I cannot explain," she spoke in a low, eager voice, with a curious lisp in her utterance. "For God's sake,
Do what I asked you. Go back and never set foot upon the moor again.
But I've only just come.
Man, she cried. Can you not tell when a warning is for your own good? Go back to London. Go tonight. Get straight away from the place at all costs. Hush, my brother is coming. Not a word of what I said. Would you mind getting that orchid for me among the mayor's tails yonder? We are very rich in orchids on the moor, though, of course, you are rather late to see the beauties of this place.
Stapleton had abandoned the chase and came back to us breathing hard and flushed from his exhalations. "Hola, Beryl," he said, and it seems to me that the tone of his greeting was not altogether a cordial one.
Well, Jack, you are very hot.
Yes, I was chasing the Cyclopedes. He was very rare and seldom found in the late autumn. What a pity that I should have lost him. He spoke unconcernedly, but his small, light eyes glanced incessantly from the girl to me. You have introduced yourselves, I see. Yes, I was telling Sir Henry that it was rather late for him to see the true beauties of the moor. Why? Who do you think this is? I imagine it must be Sir Henry Baskerville. Oh, no, said I. Only a humble commoner, but his friend. My name is Dr. Watson. A flush of vexation crossed over her expressive face. We've been talking of cross purposes, she said. Why? Good not time very much to talk, her brother remarked with the same questioning eyes. I talked as if Dr. Watson were a resident instead of being merely a visitor, she said. I cannot much matter to him whether it is early or late for the orchids. But you will come, will you not, to Merripit House? A very short walk brought us to it, a bleak moorland house, once the farm of some grazer in some old prosperous days, but now put into repair and turned into a modern dwelling. An orchard surrounded it. The trees, as is usual upon the moor, were stunted and nipped, and the effect of the whole place was mean and melancholy. We were admitted by a strange, wizened, rusty-coated old manservant, who seemed in keeping with the house. Inside, however, there were large rooms furnished with an elegance in which I had seemed to recognize the taste of the lady. As I looked from their windows to the interminable granite-flecked moor rolling unbroken to the farthest horizon, I could not but marvel at what could have been brought this highly educated man and this beautiful woman to live here in such a place. Queer spot to choose, is it not? Said he, as if to answer my thought. And yet, we managed to make ourselves fairly happy, do we not, Beryl? Quite happy, she said, but there was no ring of conviction in her words. I had a school, said Stapleton. It was in the North Country. The work of a man of my temperament was mechanical and uninteresting, but the privilege of living with youth and helping to mold those young minds and impressing them with one's own character and ideals was very dear to me. However, the fates were against us. A serious epidemic broke out in the school, and 3 of the boys died. It never recovered from the blow, and much of my capital was inevitably swallowed up. And yet, if it was not for the loss of the charming companionship of the boys, I could rejoice over my own misfortune, for my strong taste for botany and zoology. I find an unlimited field of work here, and my sister is as devoted to nature as I am. All of this, Dr. Watson, has been brought upon your head by your expression as you surveyed the moor out of our window. Ouch. It certainly did cross my mind that it might be a little dull. Less for you, perhaps, than for your sister.
No, no, I'm never dull, she said quickly. We have books, we have our studies, and we have interesting neighbors. Dr. Mortimer is the most learned man in his own line. Poor Sir Charles was also an admirable companion. We knew him well, and we miss him more than I can tell. Do you think that I should interlude when I were to call this afternoon and make my acquaintance of Sir Henry?
I'm sure that he would be delighted.
Then perhaps you would mention that I propose to do so. We may, in our humble way, do something to make things more easy for him until he becomes accustomed to his new surroundings. Will you come upstairs, Dr. Watson, and inspect my collection of Lepidoptera? I think it is the most complete one in the southwest of England. By the time that you have looked through, then lunch will most likely be ready.
But I was eager to get back to my charge. The melancholy of the moor, the death of this unfortunate pony, the weird sound which was being associated with the grim legend of the Baskervilles. All of these things tinged my thoughts with sadness. Then, on top of these more or less vague impressions, there had come the definite, distinct warning of Miss Stapleton, delivered with such intense earnestness that I could not doubt that some grave and deep reason lay behind it. I resisted all pressure to stay for lunch, and I set off at once upon my journey, taking the grass-grown path which led by the Cunningham. It seems, however, that there must have been some sort of shortcut for those who knew it, for before I had reached the end of the road, I was astounded to see Miss Stapleton sitting upon a rock by the side of the road. Her face was beautiful, flushed, and her exertions, and she held her hand to her side.
I've run all the way in order to cut you off, Dr. Watson, she said. I had not even time to put on my hat. I must not stop, or my brother may miss me. I wanted to say to you how sorry I am for the stupid mistake I made in thinking you were Sir Henry. Please forget the words I have said, which have no application whatsoever to you.
But I can't forget them, Miss Stapleton, said I. I am Sir Henry's friend, and his welfare is a very close concern of mine. Tell me why it is that you were so eager that Sir Henry should return to London.
A woman's whim, Dr. Watson. When you know me better, you understand that I cannot always give reasons for what I say or do.
No, I remember the thrill in your voice. I remember the look in your eyes. Please be frank with me, Miss Stapleton. For ever since I've been here, I've been conscious of shadows all around me. Life has become like a great Grimpen mire, with little green patches everywhere into which one may sink and wish no guide to point the track. Tell me, then, what it is that you meant, and I will promise to convey your warning to Sir Henry. An expression of irresolution passed for an instant over her face, but her eyes had hardened again when she answered me.
You make too much of it, Dr. Watson, she said. My brother and I were very much shocked by the death of Sir Charles. We knew him very intimately, for his favourite walk was over the moor to our house. He was very deeply impressed with the curse which hung over his family, and when this tragedy came, I naturally felt that there must be some grounds for his fears which he had expressed. I was distressed, therefore, when another member of the family came down here to live, and I felt that he should be warned of the danger which he will run. That was all which I intended to convey.
But what is the danger?
You know the story of the Hound.
I do not believe in such nonsense.
But I do. If you have any influence with Sir Henry, take him away from this place which has always been fatal to his family. The world is wide. Why should he wish to live in this place of danger?
Because it is a place of danger. That is Sir Henry's nature. I fear that unless you can give me some more definite information, then this would be impossible to get him to move.
I cannot say anything definite, for I do not know anything definite.
I would ask you one more question, Miss Stapleton. If you meant to know more than this when you first spoke to me, why do you not wish your brother to overhear what you said? There is nothing to which he or anyone else could object.
My brother is very anxious to have the hall inhabited, for he thinks that it is for the good of the poor folk upon the moor. He would be very angry if he knew that I had said anything which might induce Sir Henry to go away. But I've done my duty now, and I will say no more. I must get back, or he will miss me and suspect that I have seen you. Goodbye.
She had turned and had disappeared in a few moments before the scattered boulders, while I, with my full vague fears, pursued my way to Baskerville Hall.